Hello, I welcome you all in this presentation related with the subject materials processing fundamentals and practical. And we are talking about the press which is used for metal forming processes. So, if we are aware of the different types of the presses and their constructional details, then it will be easier to select the suitable type of press which is compatible with the die or the component to be manufactured, or we can design the die in such a way that it is compatible with the press which is available for metal processing like bulk metal forming or sheet metal processing. In the previous talk, I tried to introduce the various factors based on which we can classify the presses, and also we have talked about the details of the types of the presses, press classification based on the type of frame, orientation of the frame and other aspects. In this particular talk, I will be talking about the classification of the presses based on the drive system, the tonnage, the stroke, the die space, and likewise many other technical factors which are important from the specification of the point of view. So, as far as the drive mechanism is concerned, the following are the topics which will be covered. In the drive mechanism, how the reciprocating motion is realized. Say in hydraulic type, it is relatively easier because it uses double action cylinder for realizing the up and down movement of the ram, while others are like the mechanical systems like crankshaft, eccentric, cam, rack and pinion. In these cases, the rotary movement is converted into the reciprocating movement using these mechanisms. Then suspension is the another aspect. Suspension is about how the ram is suspended from the mechanisms that are delivering the power to the ram, like it is suspended from one point or double points with the help of suitable connecting rods or from 4 points. So, 1 point, 2 point or 4 point suspension systems are there. A stroke is about that what is the travel of the ram in one go, either from top to bottom or bottom to the top. Then there is a shut height. A shut height is about the spacing between the ram in lower position and the bed. Okay. Die space is about the area, that is active area of the press on which the die can be placed further operations, and tonnage about the maximum force that a press can deliver for realizing the metal forming process. Okay. So, here these are the different topics that will be covered. As far as the drive mechanism is concerned, so the classification of the press based on the drive mechanism is like the ram movement device, like how the ram movement is realized, whether it is hydraulic or mechanical, and the type of the mechanism being used for converting the rotary motion into the reciprocating motion. Then number of the gear drives which are there, like it is free from any kind of the gear drive, or it is having single gear drive or the double like that. And then the number of the crankshafts it is having, like one crank, two crank or two crankshafts, or one eccentric, two eccentrics, like that. Then the number of the gear trains. So, the power is directly being delivered to the crankshaft from motor, or it is through the flywheel, or it is through the gear train systems. So, whether it is single gear train or the multiple gear trains. So, as far as the converting the ram movement into the realizing the ram movement, ram reciprocating movement, there are two types of arrangements. One is the mechanical and another is the hydraulic type. So, in mechanical type, mostly the rotary movement is converted into the reciprocating movement using the suitable kind of the arrangement, like crankshaft, eccentric, cam, toggle, rack and pinion, screw, knuckle, etc. In hydraulic type, it uses the double action cylinder and the pressurized fluid to ensure the movement of the ram in up and downward movement. So, about these we will be talking little in detail. So, the classification further about the details, like number of crankshafts can be like single crank, or number of cranks in a crankshaft, or eccentric, like there can be single crank, double crank, single eccentric, double eccentric, like that. Number of gear drives like single drive, twin drive, or quadruple drive, which are delivering the power to the ram for applying the pressure during the operation. Then the number of gear trains, it can be direct, where motor is directly delivering the power to the crankshaft for realizing the rotary movement and then reciprocating movement. And then it is a flywheel or non-geared type, then the single gear type, double gear type, or multiple gear type. So, depending how many gear trains are there, based on that this classification is given. We will be talking about these things further in detail. As far as the hydraulic type arrangement is concerned, for realizing the reciprocating movement of the ram during the operation, it uses a piston cylinder assembly, and this piston cylinder assembly is double action type, means the pressurized fluid is fed from both the sides to realize the up and down movement of the ram. So, pumping of the pressurized oil in the cylinder facilitates the ram movement with the help of double action cylinder, which can help to move the ram both up and downward direction. This kind of the drive system does not use any gear, crankshaft, or eccentric for realizing the reciprocating movement, but the pressurized fluid is used. So, it can have a suitable system where from pressurized fluid is delivered to the cylinder, and from the cylinder it will be the fluid pressure will be helping to move the ram in up and downward direction. Another important aspect is this: the hydraulic type of the presses allow the full tonnage at all positions. So, whatever is the ram stroke length is there, the full pressure can be realized at any position of the ram, but in mechanical systems the maximum pressure is realized at the bottom portion of the stroke. So, the mechanical press, that is why allows the full tonnage at the bottom of the stroke. Okay. So, this is an important aspect. So, in case of mechanical presses, based on the position of the ram, the different tonnage can be identified, and that is given by the manufacturers of the mechanical type of the presses. Crankshaft type of the press is one where the rotary movement of the crankshaft, where crankshaft is used to convert the rotary movement into the reciprocating movement. So, just like any other crankshaft, it also uses a typical crankshaft where there is a crank and which is having some kind of the offset. So, rotary movement allows the up and downward movement of the connecting rod. So, connecting rod is connected with the crank pin, and that allows the up and down movement. Only difference is in case of the automotives, the size of the crank pin may be limited, but in case of the presses it is huge to apply, to enhance the capacity and the tonnage of the press. Okay. So, here if we see, the crankshaft is just like automotive, but of the different size, especially it is large to enhance the capacity. Crankshaft at both the ends is mounted on the bearings, okay, so that it gets the desired support, and then it is rotated with the help of suitable power arrangement, maybe electric motor, or the power is delivered through the flywheel or a suitable gear train. This rotary movement is then converted into reciprocating movement. So, these are usually flywheel driven, because if the crankshaft is directly connected with the electric motor, and the power is delivered to the ram through the crankshaft, then suddenly huge load comes on the motor. So, in order to avoid that, the flywheel system is used, so that we can engage and disengage the motor from the crankshaft in order to avoid the kind of overloading, especially when the pressure is applied during the operation. Okay. So, the crankshaft mounted on the bearing, and it is supported by the frame of the press. So, the frame of the press will be taking all kind of the loads and stresses that will be generated during the operation. offset or throwback, like that, this is the offset or the throwback that determines the up and down movement. So, the offset is x, then the up and down movement, the stroke will be 2x. So, if the offset of the crank pin axis is about at x distance from the axis of the crankshaft, then the total travel in up and down movement of the ram, that is the stroke length, will be equal to the twice of x, and a connecting rod is used to join the throw, that is crank pin, and the ram to realize this up and down movement of the ram and to facilitate the action. Okay. So, here these are the few important points related to the crankshaft type of arrangement, but the crank pin is usually of the smaller diameter, and when the ram acts on to the die during the operation, back thrust pressure comes onto the crank pin, and if the area of the crank pin is small, then this will be subjected to the kind of mechanical damage on each operation. So, that is the another aspect. So, to reduce this, what we do, we try to increase the size of the crank pin, but there is a limit after all for each thing. Okay. So, if we try to see the eccentric type of the press is the another one. This is similar to the crankshaft. Here also the rotary movement of the shaft is converted into the reciprocating movement with the help of the eccentric. Okay. So, it offers the eccentric type press offers the more surface area at the bearing support for the connecting rod, and that in turn reduces the effect of the back pressure that will be coming onto the eccentric as compared to that of the in the case of the crankshaft. So, the large surface area effectively takes back the thrust on closing of the dies, because if the area is less than the smaller bearing area on the crank pin of the crankshaft causes the hardening or the brinelling effect. So, the hardening effect will be leading to the chipping or the removal of the material in form of fine particles. Okay, due to the continuous hardening or the brinelling effect, but the surface area of the eccentric is large, therefore, the brinelling effect is minimized in case of the eccentric type of the presses. As a result, microfractures in case of the crank pin, microfractures at the crank pin surface causes the removal of the material and eventually failure of the crankshaft. So, this issue of the brinelling and the micro fracturing of the crank pin surface is minimized when we have the large surface area of the eccentric. Okay, so, this is the another advantage of the eccentric type of the presses, but these are like both crankshaft and the eccentric type of the presses both offer the limited stroke length. Okay. So, this is although another side of as far as the capacity of the mechanical type of the presses is concerned, or the crankshaft and the eccentric type of the presses is concerned. Cam is one where the cam is used to convert the rotary motion into the reciprocating motion, but this kind of the cam presses are not very common. These also work in the principle similar to that of the eccentric, and there is no connecting rod like in your the crank, the eccentric type, and no rotation of the cam forces the ram in downward direction by compressing the springs, and springs lifts the ram in up position. So, here basically a cam is used to convert the rotary motion into the reciprocating motion, and when the cam operates, it forces the ram in downward direction against the springs which will be pressed, and then the springs will be lifting the ram in up position. Then the another technical factor related with the drives, number of drives or the number of gears which are there in press. So, the number of gears attached to the end of the crankshaft. So, it is possible like this is the, like say this is one crankshaft. Okay. So, power may be delivered from one end, like gear is attached at one end only, or it is a power is delivered from both the ends. So, depending upon the size and the area of the press, this kind of the arrangement is used. So, single drive where the gear is arranged for gear for delivery of the power to the crankshaft is on the one side. Okay. So, in single drive system, one gear for small tonnage presses is used, where the power is delivered from one side of the crankshaft or whatever means through which power is being delivered. This is good for the small tonnage. Twin drive system, where the driving gears are set at both the ends of the crankshaft, and this is particularly used when the bed length is large. Okay. So, in case of the length of the bed is large, we will be using the crankshaft like this. Okay. So, this side we have one gear, okay, like this. So, this side one gear and another side another gear. So, this is particularly true when the length of the press is large, and when the width is also large, then we use the quadruple type of the arrangement, where like one crankshaft. So, the one gears and the another crankshaft like this. Okay. So, this allows us to use the not just larger length, but also the width. Okay. So, the quadruple drive, where the power is delivered to the crankshaft from two sides, both the ends of each crankshaft, and having the two crankshafts. Okay. So, in quadruple drive for large length and large width, two crankshafts with one drive at each end allows the development of very large lengthy presses of the large width. This will be permitting the large size of the die space and the handling of the large size components. So, the twin drive driving gears at each end of the crankshaft when a long bed is used, else the single drive will be experiencing the twisting. Say if the length is too much like this, and this is the crank, and here the bearing support and the gear is here. So, if the torque will be delivered just from one side, and if the length is too much, then twisting will be experienced by the shaft, and that may adversely affect the functioning of the press. Okay. So, number of the crankshaft and the crank single crank arrangement means, in a crankshaft we may have either single crank like this, or we may have multiple cranks, and from each of the crank there will be a connecting rod that will be used to support the ram like this. So, the is a ram which is moving up and downward direction, and these are like say the connecting rods. These are connecting rods. So, connecting rods are supporting the ram from the 2 points. So, in a single crank, a crankshaft may have 1, 2 or 3 cranks for the narrow bed. Press with the double crankshaft has the 2 cranks in each. Okay. So, that will allow the larger bed area, and not just length, but larger bed area also. So, for large bed area, presses use the double crank type of the press, double crankshafts and double crank also. Okay. And now, how the power is being delivered to the crankshaft from the prime mover or electric motor, that will be the basis for the classification based on the way by which power is being delivered. So, here direct drive is one where motor is directly connected with the crankshaft with the help of a gearing arrangement, like the pinion mounted on the motor shaft and the gear is mounted onto the crankshaft. Okay. So, here power is directly being delivered to the crankshaft from the electric motor. So, they are rigidly connected, but here we may have a clutch to start and stop the operation, but this kind of the direct arrangement, direct drive system causes the back thrust during the operation and direct loading onto the electric motor. So, in the direct drive method, the power is transmitted from the motor to the crankshaft through the pinion, which is mounted on the motor shaft, engages with the gear drive on the crankshaft. Drive gear acts as a flywheel because this is little heavy, although it does not, especially when it is connected through the clutch, okay, and it is used for low tonnage and short stroke lengths, okay. But this kind of the arrangement direct drive system allows the higher number of the stroke like 100 strokes per minute, but the stroke length is limited, tonnage is limited, okay, in case of the direct drive arrangement, okay. Then the flywheel type, in the flywheel type the gear is absent, we can say there is electric motor and then there is a V belt, there is a pulley with the V groove arrangement and the flywheel also with the V groove arrangement. So, the V belt is used to run, to deliver the power from the electric motor to the crankshaft. Again there is a clutch system. So, initially the clutch will be disengaging the flywheel from the crankshaft and power is delivered from the electric motor to the flywheel. When enough energy is stored, the clutch will be engaging the crankshaft with the flywheel. So, the rotary movement of the crankshaft will be started. So, here there is no gear for transfer of the power, motor pulley transfers the power to the flywheel via V welt and the flywheel rotates freely on the crankshaft and then power is engaged, I mean so the it is engaged, crankshaft is engaged using a clutch system when sufficient energy is delivered to the flywheel for the operation. Clutch allows the start and stop action and it is used for low tonnage and short strokes, but in this case the direct drive is harder on the motor than the flywheel because in the later case, in case of the flywheel, there is some scope for slipping of the belt over the pulley in case of the overloading action. So, the flywheel arrangement causes much lesser overloading onto the motor as compared to the direct drive. So, direct drive is harder on the motor than the flywheel type of the arrangement because of the slip action possibility, especially when the action is taking place. Then the number of the gear trains, there can be single gear train or double gear train or multiple gear trains. So, in this case the electric motor will be delivering the power and through the pulley, then the flywheel arrangement and then there is a clutch for engaging and disengaging the things and then the power is delivered through the gear, a gear train to the crankshaft. So, this is one gear train, okay. So, this kind of the setup will be permitting the greater mechanical advantage as well as the lesser number of strokes per minute, higher tonnage will be possible with this kind of arrangement. So, here power is delivered to the crankshaft through this arrangement where through the pulley and V belt arrangement power is transferred first to the flywheel and then with the help of clutch arrangement power is delivered to the flywheel pinion and then gear drive pinion, okay. And then the gear drive pinion will further be delivering the power to the crankshaft to realize the rotary motion into the reciprocating motion. In this arrangement if we see there is a single gear train, pinion and gear, this is a single gear train, but additionally what we have is the advantage of the pulley, V belt and the flywheel arrangement. So, single geared press may be single or twin drive, means how the power is being delivered just from one end or both the ends. Twin drive is obtained by having the pinion and the drive on the flywheel and the crankshaft respectively. Clutch may be placed between the flywheel and its shaft and clutch may also be placed between the drive gear and crankshaft. So, there is a possibility we may have clutch here or we may have clutch here. So, in this case this arrangement clutch is there at one place only. Addition of the gear train results the increased tonnage capacity, longer strokes and the greater mechanical advantage. Okay, this is the arrangement, this is the double gear train arrangement where the first setting is same electric motor, then the power delivery with the help of pulley and the V belt arrangement and then the one gear train and then another gear train. So, this is the double gear train arrangement. In this case also we will see there is one clutch and then we may have additional clutches here for delivering the power to the crankshaft. So, when we use the double gear train arrangement, this will further be permitting the shorter means fewer number of the number of strokes per minute, okay, this is one, and it will be permitting the higher tonnage, okay, higher tonnage will be possible. So, that is the another side, and the third is it will be permitting the greater stroke length. So, these are the three benefits that will be realized. So, the slowest ram movement is possible, therefore, this kind of the double gear train arrangement is used for the drawing operation of the sheet metals, while the direct or flywheel type of the drive systems allow the fastest movement for cutting and the forming dies. So, for cutting and shearing action, the mechanical systems with the direct or the flywheel type of arrangement is used. For drawing operations, the single or double gear train kind of the arrangements are used for delivering the power. So, this is about the number of strokes that are possible. Direct or flywheel type allows the 100 strokes per minute, single geared allows about 50 strokes per minute, and double geared further fewer number of strokes like 30 number of the strokes per minute. Now, as far as the suspension system is concerned, here we will see the in the what is the meaning of the suspension system? A press suspension is the number of points suspending the ram. So, from how many points it is getting supported, say this is the ram. So, it can be supported just from one point, then it is the single point suspension or one point suspension system, or suspended from the 2 points, then double suspension system. 3 is rare, but there can be 4 point suspension system. So, 1 point suspension system has one connecting rod and one crankshaft for square presses. 2 point suspension system uses the 2 connecting rods and one crankshaft with the two throws or 2 cranks. This is particularly good for the longer presses, but the narrow width. So, here one say this is the crankshaft. So, the one suspension is here, another suspension is here, that is for the 2, and in case of the 4 suspension system, it is used for the very longer bed, longer and wider presses. So, using the 2 connecting rods like this and the 2 suspension systems on each of the connecting rods. So, that is how it forms the 4 suspension system, uses the 2 connecting rods on each of the 2 crankshafts and 2 crank in each. So, that this is good for the large and square rams. So, the longer presses and wider presses, this kind of the suspension system is good. Then the tonnage, about the maximum force that a press can apply. Okay, maximum force that a press can exert is about the tonnage. Overloading of the press can cause either deformation or fracture or wear, a very rapid wearing out of the material. So, premature failure due to the fracture or wear action. And the tonnage of the hydraulic presses is limited by the press and the cylinder area through which piston area through which pressure is being built. So, here say pressure is P and area of the piston is A, then P into A will decide the kind of the maximum force that it can apply during the operation. So, this can vary from 550 to 5000 tons. Okay, and this can simply be changed by changing the oil pressure. Change the oil pressure for a given piston area, the tonnage of the hydraulic press can be changed. But in case of the mechanical presses, say this is the crank pin which will be providing the rotary movement to the reciprocating movement, and it will be taking the load also during the action. So, if the crank pin area A, which is obtained from the pi by 4 d square, d is the diameter. Okay. So, pi by 4 d square multiplied by shear strength. So, if the shear strength Fs of the crankshaft material and the crank pin diameter is d, then we can determine the shear area multiplied by shear strength of the material. This will determine the maximum force that can be applied with the help of the mechanical press. So, the tonnage of the mechanical press is obtained from the shear strength of the crankshaft multiplied by bearing area of the crankshaft, bearing area of the crank. And since these two are fixed, for a given crankshaft Fs is fixed and given crank pin diameter As is fixed. So, our tonnage of the mechanical presses is fixed, it cannot be changed. Okay, this is the reason. So, tonnage of the mechanical press is fixed and cannot be changed. So, usually manufacturers supply a chart for tonnage versus the ram position. Why? Because the maximum force that a mechanical press can apply is the lowermost position of the ram, but in case of the hydraulic presses, the maximum pressure can be applied for any position of the ram in its stroke length. So, therefore, it is important to see the chart supplied by the manufacturer for tonnage versus the ram position relationship. Then we have the stroke length is the another important aspect. What it shows that what is the movement of the ram from its up position to the down position. So, in its journey, what is the distance traveled? Whatever is the distance traveled, that is termed as stroke. So, whatever is the movement in one direction, that is the up from upward to the downward movement, same will be in the return movement. Okay. So, the distance of the ram movement from its up position to the down position is called stroke length. Say 150 stroke means 150 movement either in upward direction or in downward direction. Okay. It is determined by the crankshaft throw. So, the throw is x, then the stroke length will be twice of x. Okay, as I have said earlier, stroke length is equal to the double of the crankshaft throw or eccentricity of the eccentric drive. It is fixed for the crankshaft and eccentrics, but it is adjustable for the hydraulic type. This is another very good side where the stroke length is adjustable in case of the hydraulic system. Of course, it will be limited by the cylinder length in which the double action piston is double action cylinder in which piston is working. So, this will be governed by the maximum length of the piston. Okay. Then the another important aspect is the shut height. Shut height is about the ram in its lowermost position and the bed. See, this is bed and this is the ram in lowermost position. So, the distance between the two is called shut height. Okay. This will be affecting the maximum size of the component and maximum size of the die that can be accommodated under the ram. So, if you have to see the die, say this is the ram position in down position and position of the ram in its lowermost position and then the bed. So, the distance between the two is called shut height. So, height of the opening between the bed and the ram in down position, and this maximum closed opening of the press that determines the size of the component and the size of the die that can be accommodated in a press. So, the ram adjustment, in some of the cases adjustment of the ram or the ram stroke or the strokes per minute is possible. So, the ram adjustment, it is provided by a special screw between the ram and connecting rod. It helps to adjust the shut height of the press, and this adjustment can be used to decrease the shut height, not to increase the same. As far as the number of strokes per minute is concerned, the C frame type presses offers the maximum number of the strokes per minute of all types of the presses, while the single and double geared presses offer the lowest number of strokes per minute. Okay. Die space about the area on the press that is available over which die can be mounted, and it is determined by the area of the ram and the bed. Now, I will summarize this presentation. In this presentation, basically I have talked about the drive systems, the mechanisms which are used to convert the rotary movement into the reciprocating movement, and the shut height, the stroke length, the tonnage and the die space, likewise many other technical parameters related with the die press, which plays a big role in operation and the successful performance of the press for realizing the bulk metal forming or sheet metal forming operations. Thank you for your attention.